So today we're looking at Chapter 4, Lesson 1, and that's Terminating and Repeating Decimals. Now, it says any fraction can be expressed as a decimal by dividing the numerator by the denominator. Okay? A decimal in the form of a fraction is called a repeating decimal. If the repeating decimal, if you get a repeating decimal, it can be represented using bar notation. And these are examples of bar notation down here. Okay? Now, in bar notation, the bar only goes over the repeating part. It only goes over the digits that repeat. So, for example, here we've got 11.38585, and so on and so on and so on. The part that repeats is the 85. So when you write the bar notation, the bar only goes over the 8 and the 5. Is everybody clear with that? Now, if the repeating digit is a 0, the decimal is called a terminating decimal. So that means if you keep on doing your long division and you keep getting 0, 0, 0, 0 as the remainder, then that is a terminating decimal. So if you look here, if you have a 0.250, remember we said that the trailing zeros are insignificant, so you don't even need them. So that's the reason why when we write them as a terminating decimal, we write 0.25. So Jamie had 2 hits on her first 9 times at bat. To find her batting average, she divided 2 divided by 9. So when she divided the 2 divided by 9, she ended up with 0.2222 repeating. It goes on forever and ever and ever. Now here, if we're going to write that using bar notation, what repeats? The 2 repeats. So when we write it using bar notation, we're going to write it with the bar over the 2. Okay? This next part says round that repeating decimal to the nearest thousandth. So if we're rounding to the nearest thousandth, that means we have to go out to the 10,000ths. You see what I'm saying? Because that number is going to tell me what to do. So here, if we're rounding to the nearest thousandth, that's this one, that means we have to look at the next number to tell me what to do. And what does that number tell me to do? Keep it the same. Very good. So we're going to end up with 0.222. All right, so we're going to write fractions as decimals. I know this part is in the example part, but I want you to write some of these down, okay? Our decimal system is based on powers of 10, such as 10, 100, and 1,000. If the denominator of a fraction is a power of 10, you can use place value to write the fraction as a decimal. So here, for example, we have 7/10. You know, you guys remember when a long time ago we did the read it, write it, and then simplify it. This is part of that, okay? So you're going to read the 7/10 words, and then you can write that as a fraction. 7/10, 7 over 10. Okay? And then 7/10 as a decimal is 0.7. And yes, I want you to put the 0 in the front. Okay? So 1900ths. 1900ths, when you read that, now you're going to write it as a fraction. It's going to be 19 over 100. And that you can't simplify that. So we end up with 1900ths, which is 0.19. All right, the next one, when you read it, you read 105 thousandths. So 105 thousandths. So when we write that, we write 105 over 1,000. Very good. And of course, when we write that fraction, now you can simplify it, right? So we can simplify this by dividing the numerator and the denominator by 5, and we end up with 21 over 200. Okay, so that's the fraction form of 105 thousandths. But if I want to write the decimal, you just write it just how you said it, 105 thousandths. So it's 0.105. So, for example 1, it says write each fraction or mixed number as a decimal. So here we have 74 over 100. When we read that, we read 74 hundredths. So you can just go straight to the decimal, 0.74. Now, for 7/20ths, that's not a 10 or 100 or 1,000 or a 10,000, but we can make it to 100, right? So here we're going to change the 20 to 100 by multiplying times 5. So if I multiply the bottom by 5, that's going to give me 100, right? If I multiply the numerator by 5, that's going to give me 35. So now I have 35 hundredths, and then 35 hundredths, you can hear it, is written as 0.35. Now for the mixed number. When you have a mixed number, you have a whole number part and you have a fractional part. That fractional part you can change to a decimal. Okay, so we're going to separate them. We're going to separate it to the whole number part, and we're going to add the decimal or the fractional part to it. Okay, so here we have 5 and 3/4. The 3/4, well, we know that 3/4 is 0.75, right? If you don't know that 3/4 is 0.75, or if you have a fraction that you don't know is what the decimal part form is, you can always just divide 3 divided by 4. Is everybody clear? And that's going to give us 0.75. So this is what we're going to add to the 5. So we have 5 plus 0.75. So our decimal form of 5 and 3/4 is 5.75. For the got it problems down here, I forgot to put the direction down there. We're going to use this direction right here. It says write each fraction or mixed number as a decimal. Okay, that's what we're going to do down here. So here we have 3/10. For 3/10, all you're going to do is you're just going to read the fraction. You just read it. Okay, so when we read it, we end up with 0.3. That's all there is to it. For example B, we have 3/25. Now 3/25, we have to change that denominator to 100, right? So we can multiply times 4. Very good, in the numerator and the denominator. So when we do that, we end up with 12 hundredths, which simplifies. We can now, well, we're not going to simplify that. We're going to write it as a decimal. 12 over 100, 12 hundredths is written as 0.12. Very good. Now, this last one here, we're going to change -6 1/2 to a decimal. Now, when you do the negatives, okay, you're just going to kind of like think about that negative and just put it aside for a minute. And then when we finish with all of our calculations, then we're going to put the negative back on. Okay? So here, when we separate these, like we did in the example, we're going to separate it as 6 plus 1/2. Okay? And of course, the 1/2, if we do that division, 1 divided by 2, that's going to give us 0.5. So when we add them together, we're going to add 6 plus the 0.5, which gives us 6.5, or 6.5, right? And then, of course, we're going to add the negative. So now, at the end, you're just going to put that negative back on. All right, for the next examples, we're writing the fractions as decimals. Now these are decimals that are fractions that we can't change to 100 as easily as we did the previous ones, right? So here, we're going to have to do some long division. So when we write the fractions as decimals, we're going to have to use long division, okay? So when we divide a fraction, is everybody listening? You're going to divide the numerator divided by the denominator. When you change a fraction to a decimal, you're going to divide the numerator divided by the denominator. So for example 5, we're going to divide 1 divided by 40. So when we do that, we end up with 0.025, and then once again, you're going to take the negative, and then you're going to put it back on. So you're going to take the negative and set it aside for a bit, and then at the end, after you do your calculations, you put the negative back on. Okay? For number 4, we're going to divide 3 divided by 8. Numerator divided by the denominator. And we end up with 0.375. And then finally, if you look over here, for 7/9, we're going to divide 7 divided by 9, and we're going to end up with a repeating decimal. Okay? So once you have that repeating decimal, then you're going to write it using bar notation. So the 0.77777 and so forth becomes 0.7 with the bar notation over the 7. So here we're going to write each fraction or mixed number as a decimal, and we're going to use bar notation if necessary. So I'm going to show some long division, okay? So here, when I'm changing -7/8 to a decimal, we're going to divide the numerator divided by the denominator. So this is going to be 7 divided by 8. Is everybody clear? So when we do that, we're going to divide. When we divide, I'll use this one, we have to annex a 0, and then we're going to bring the decimal up top, okay? So how many times does 8 go into 70? 8 times. So 8 times 8 is 64, and then we subtract. So 70 minus 64 is 6, and then we're going to annex a 0 and bring that down. All right, so then we're going to bring down that 0. So how many times does 8 go into 60? 7 times. So that's going to be 56, and then we're going to subtract again, right? So when we subtract, that's going to give me 4. And then we're going to annex another 0 and bring that down. And 40 divided by 8 is 5. So now you can see we're finishing at 0. So once we do that, then we're going to add the sign after we finish dividing. So here, our final answer is going to be a negative, and don't forget, I want you to put the 0 on that, 0.875. So for the next one here, we have 2 1/8. Okay. So for 2 1/8, the way we're going to deal with the mixed numbers is we can change this to an improper fraction. Okay. You guys remember how to change a mixed number to an improper fraction? All right. So we have 8 times 2 plus 1, so we have 17/8. So this is what we're going to divide. Numerator divided by denominator. So when we do that division, we end up with 17 divided by 8. All right? And we're going to go ahead and put this in the calculator. So we've got 17 divided by 8, and we end up with 2.125. So when we do this division, this is going to give us 2.125. Okay? All right, so for the next one, we have a negative 3/11. So once again, we're going to put the decimal aside, and then we're going to add the sign after the dividing. So what we're going to divide is the numerator divided by the denominator. I mean, put the sign aside until after dividing. Okay, so what we're going to divide is 3 divided by 11. So we're dividing, 3 divided by 11. So when we do that, and we're going to use our long division for this one, we're going to annex the 0 and bring that decimal up. How many times does 11 go into 30? 2 times. So 2 times 11 is 22. And then we subtract. So when we subtract, 30 minus 22 is 8. And then we're going to annex another 0. So we're going to bring that down. And how many times does 11 go into 80?
7.
7 times. So 7 times 11 is 77. You see what's happening here? 80 minus 77 is 3. Look at this. 3, right? So let's just check. So we're going to annex another 0. So 11 goes into 30 2 times. So 2 times 11 is 22. And then when we subtract, we get 8. And then if I annex another one, what's going to be here?
7.
And how many times does 11 go into 80?
7.
7 times. You see what's repeating there?
Yes.
So let me just finish my division here. And that's going to be 3 down there. So when we write our final answer, I'm just going to write it over here. We've got a negative 0.27 with the bar notation over the repeating part, which is the 27. Is everybody clear? All right. All right, so every terminating decimal can be written as a fraction with a denominator of 100, 10, or 1,000. We want to use the place value of the final digit as the denominator. So for example 7, it says find the fraction of the fish in the aquarium that are goldfish. And we want to write this in simplest form. So here, for goldfish, it's 0.15. If I read that correctly, it's 15 hundredths, right? So to write that as a fraction, you write it 15 over 100. And then, of course, you can simplify by dividing by 5, right? You're going to divide the numerator and the denominator by 5, and you'll end up with 3/20. So this one is the read it, write it, simplify it. So here we're going to determine the fraction of the aquarium made up by each fish, and we want to write the answer in simplest form. So continuing with the same table up top, we're going to look at the molly. So the molly is 0.2. This, don't forget, is read it, write it, and simplify it. Read, write, and simplify. Okay, so for the molly, that is 0.2. Read correctly, that's 2/10. So we write 2/10, and of course, now we're going to simplify it. So we're going to simplify by dividing by 2 in the numerator and the denominator. So when we simplify, we end up with 1/5. So 0.2, written as a fraction, is 1/5. For guppies, that's 0.25. So read correctly, that's 25 hundredths. So written as a fraction, that's 25 over 100. To simplify, we can divide by 25 in the numerator and in the denominator. And when we do that, we end up with 1/4. And then finally, for the angelfish, we have 0.4, which read correctly would be 4/10. Then to simplify, we can divide by 2. in the numerator and in the denominator. So when we divide and to simplify, we end up with 2/5. So 4/10, or 0.4, written as a fraction, is 2/5.